There is a moment, just before waking, when the world is nothing more than sound. And on this island the sound is always the same. It is the sea. Not crashing, not roaring, not doing anything so dramatic as all that. It is simply there, a low and endless murmur, like the breathing of something impossibly large, something that has been exhaling against these rocks for thousands upon thousands of years, and will continue to do so long after every last stone of this lighthouse has crumbled and been carried away. It is a deep sound, a muffled sound, heard not so much through the ears as through the walls themselves, through the thick slabs of grey granite that make up this small keeper's cottage, through the mortar between them, through the cold flagstone floor, and up through the legs of the narrow wooden bed. It travels through the bones. It is the first thing you hear in the morning and the last thing you hear at night. And after enough weeks on this island, you stop noticing it entirely. It becomes the silence itself. And so the keeper wakes. Not suddenly. There is no alarm here, no bell, no sharp noise to jolt a man from sleep. There is only the slow, imperceptible lifting of the darkness behind his closed eyelids, a faint and grudging brightening of the air that suggests, without any enthusiasm whatsoever, that morning has arrived somewhere behind the clouds. It is November. In the Hebrides, in November, morning is not so much an event as a rumour. The sky does not lighten so much as it shifts from one shade of grey to another, from the deep charcoal of night to the pale, wet slate of day. And the transition between them is so gradual, so reluctant, that you could watch the small window beside the bed for 20 minutes and never be entirely sure whether the sun has risen or not. It has, presumably. It is up there somewhere, above the layers of cloud that sit upon these islands like damp wool pressed over a lantern. But its light, by the time it reaches this little room, is thin and watery and apologetic, as though it has travelled a very great distance and lost most of its confidence along the way. The keeper lies still for a long moment beneath his blankets. There are 3 of them. The first is a heavy cotton sheet, rough and slightly stiff, the kind of fabric that never quite feels warm on its own, but serves as a necessary foundation for the layers above it. The second is a thick woolen blanket, a dark navy blue, dense and tightly woven, with a faint smell of lanolin that has never entirely left the fibres despite years of use. It is the kind of wool that feels almost oily to the touch, slightly coarse against the skin of the chin and neck, but deeply, reassuringly warm. The third, laid on top, is an old quilt, heavier than it looks, filled with some manner of batting that has compressed and shifted over the years so that certain patches are thicker than others. Together, these 3 layers form a cocoon of warmth that the keeper is in no great hurry to leave because the air beyond them is cold. Not bitterly cold, not the sharp and biting cold of a winter frost, but the particular damp cold of a stone room on a Scottish island, a cold that seems to have seeped into the walls during the night and now radiates gently inward from every surface. It settles on the face. It touches the tip of the nose and the tops of the ears. It makes the very idea of pulling back the blankets feel like an act of tremendous and unnecessary bravery. But the keeper does, eventually, pull them back. He does so slowly, folding the quilt down first, then the woolen blanket, then pushing aside the sheet with one leg. He swings his feet to the floor, and they meet the wooden boards, and the boards are cold. They are wide planks of oak, darkened with age and use, worn smooth in the places where feet have landed every morning for decades, but still rough and grainy in the corners, and along the edges near the walls where no one steps. There are small gaps between some of the planks, narrow lines of black shadow where the wood has contracted over the years, and from these gaps rises the faintest draught, a breath of cold air from the stone foundation below. The keeper's feet find his shoes, a pair of heavy leather boots that sit beside the bed where he left them the night before. He does not put them on yet. He simply sits on the edge of the bed for a moment, hands resting on his knees, and listens to the rain. Because it is raining. Of course it is raining. It rains here more often than it does not, and today the rain is the soft, persistent kind, the kind that does not fall so much as drift, carried sideways by a low wind that pushes it against the western wall of the cottage in a continuous, gentle hiss. It beads on the two small window panes of the bedroom, each pane no larger than a dinner plate, set deep into the thick stone wall. The condensation on the inside of the glass has formed during the night, the product of warm breath meeting cold surface, and it clings to the panes in a fine, even mist of tiny droplets, each one no bigger than the head of a pin. They blur the view outside, turning the world beyond into a soft wash of grey and green and the distant, darker grey of the sea. Here and there, a single droplet has grown heavy enough to slide downward, leaving a thin, clear trail behind it, a tiny river cutting through the mist, and through this narrow streak one can glimpse for just an instant the wet grass of the hillside and the white foam on the rocks below, before the condensation closes in again. The keeper stands, the floorboards creak under his weight, a sound so familiar it barely registers, a low groan from the second plank near the foot of the bed that has made exactly that noise for as long as anyone can remember. He pulls on a pair of thick wool socks, grey and slightly misshapen from many washings, and then a heavy knitted jumper that hangs from a wooden peg on the back of the door. The jumper is dark, the colour of peat, and it smells faintly of wood smoke and salt air, and something that might be described as the general smell of this island, a smell that works its way into every piece of fabric and never leaves. He steps out of the small bedroom and into the main room of the cottage. This room serves as kitchen, sitting room, and everything else. It is not large. A man could cross it in perhaps 8 or 9 paces. The ceiling is low, supported by dark wooden beams that have been blackened over the years by smoke from the stove. The walls are the same grey stone as the rest of the cottage, bare in most places, though someone, perhaps a previous keeper, has hung a small framed print of a sailing vessel on the wall near the door, and it hangs there still, slightly crooked, the glass dusty. The floor here is the same oak planking, and against the far wall stands the stove. The stove is a squat, heavy thing made of cast iron, black and solid, with short legs that lift it a few inches off the floor, and a flat top with 2 round cooking plates. Its door is a small square hatch with a simple latch, and when the keeper opens it now, the interior is dark and cold. The fire went out sometime in the early hours. There is nothing inside but a bed of fine grey ash, and beneath it the faintest suggestion of warmth, a ghost of last night's fire that has been slowly surrendering its heat to the cold air all through the dark hours. The keeper kneels before it. He reaches into a wooden box beside the stove and takes out a handful of dry kindling, thin sticks of driftwood that were gathered from the shore weeks ago and have been drying in the cottage ever since. He arranges them over the ash in a small, loose pyramid, then tears a strip of old newspaper from a pile kept on the shelf above, crumples it, and tucks it beneath the kindling. A match is struck. The sound of it is sharp and small in the quiet room. A brief scratch and then a flare of yellow light that seems impossibly bright in the grey morning dimness. He touches the flame to the paper. It catches. It curls and blackens, and the flame spreads to the edges and then upward, licking at the kindling, and the thin sticks begin to crackle softly, a sound like tiny whispers. He adds a few larger pieces of wood, then a small brick of dried peat, dense and dark and fibrous, and closes the stove door, leaving the vent open to let the draught feed the growing flame. Within a few minutes, a low, ticking sound begins as the iron body of the stove starts to expand with the heat, and a warmth begins to radiate outward into the room, tentative at first, then steadier, and the smell of peat smoke, earthy and rich and ancient, fills the air. While the stove warms, the keeper fills a kettle. It is a blackened iron kettle, dented on one side, its handle wrapped in a strip of old cloth to guard against the heat. He fills it from a pitcher of water that was drawn from the rain cistern the evening before, and he sets it on the stove's cooking plate. The water will take some time to boil. He waits. He stands by the stove with his hands held out toward its warmth, turning them slowly, palms and then backs, and he listens to the rain against the western wall and the low murmur of the kettle as the water inside begins, very gradually, to stir. When it finally boils, it does so with a soft, rolling sound, and steam rises from the spout in a thin, curling thread. He pours the water into a heavy stoneware mug, brown and chipped at the rim, in which he has already placed a measure of loose black tea leaves. The water darkens almost immediately, swirling with tannin, and he lets it steep for several long minutes, far longer than most would consider necessary, until the tea is nearly black, bitter, and strong enough to leave a faint, astringent feeling on the tongue. He adds no milk. There is none. He adds no sugar. He simply wraps both hands around the mug and drinks it slowly, standing by the stove, feeling the heat of the tea spread from his palms into his fingers and from his stomach outward into his chest. The first cup of the day is never rushed. For his morning meal, the keeper cuts 2 thick slices from a loaf of dense brown bread that sits wrapped in cloth on the shelf. The bread is several days old and has grown firm, but it is not stale, merely solid, and when he places the slices on the flat top of the stove to toast, they warm slowly and develop a dry, golden crust that is deeply satisfying to bite through. He spreads them with a thin layer of salted butter from a small crock and eats them standing up, chewing slowly, brushing the crumbs from his jumper with the back of his hand. He pours a second cup of tea, drinks it with the same unhurried patience as the first, and then sets the mug in the stone basin that serves as a sink. The meal is done. The cottage is warm now, or warm enough, and the grey light from the windows has brightened by perhaps a single, imperceptible degree. The keeper moves to the wooden peg by the door and lifts down his heavy wool coat. It is a long coat, dark, thick as a blanket, with broad lapels and deep pockets, and a weight to it that feels reassuring the moment it settles on the shoulders. He buttons it slowly, one button at a time from the bottom upward. He pulls a woolen cap down over his ears. He takes one last look at the stove, checks that the vent is set to a low, steady draw so the fire will keep while he is gone, and then he opens the heavy wooden door of the cottage and steps out into the grey, drizzly morning. The wind meets him immediately, cool and wet and carrying the smell of salt and heather, and before him, rising against the low sky like a column of pale stone, the Lighthouse tower stands waiting. Part 2, the polishing. The path from the cottage to the base of the tower is no more than 40 paces, but in this weather, those 40 paces are enough to dampen every exposed surface of a man's clothing. The rain is not heavy. It has no need to be heavy. It is fine and persistent, and it moves sideways on the wind, finding its way into the folds of the coat collar, settling on the wool of the cap, in a million tiny droplets that cling to the fibers like dew on a spider's web. The path itself is made of flat stones set into the earth, uneven and slick with moisture, and between them grows a short, tough grass that has been beaten flat by the wind and turned a deep, dark green by the endless rain. The keeper walks this path with the careful, unhurried gait of a man who has learned that wet stone is not to be trusted, but who has also walked this particular stretch so many times that his feet know every rise and dip without conscious thought. To his left, the hillside drops away toward the cliffs, and beyond the cliffs there is nothing but the sea, a vast and featureless expanse of grey that meets the grey sky at a horizon so indistinct it is impossible to say where one ends and the other begins. To his right, the tower rises. It is a handsome structure, though handsome is perhaps too decorative a word for something so plainly functional. It is built of the same grey granite as the cottage, quarried from the mainland and brought here by boat decades ago, each block cut and fitted with a precision that speaks of engineers who understood that the sea would test every joint and seam for as long as the tower stood. The walls are thick, enormously thick, tapering slightly as they rise, and the base is broad and solid, anchored to the rock of the island as though it had grown from it. A heavy wooden door, painted white but now flaking and worn to bare wood in places, is set into the base, and the keeper opens it with a large iron key that he carries in his coat pocket. The key turns with a deep, satisfying click, and the door swings inward on hinges that groan softly, and then he is inside. The interior of the base is a small circular room, dim and cool, smelling of damp stone and old iron, and the faint, lingering trace of paraffin oil that has permeated every surface over the years. There is a workbench against one curved wall, and on it are arranged the tools and supplies of the keeper's trade. Tins of polishing paste, folded squares of linen cloth, a set of small brass-handled screwdrivers, a pair of trimming scissors with short, precise blades, a bottle of clock oil with a long, thin spout, and various other implements, each in its place, each exactly where it was yesterday and the day before. The keeper gathers what he needs. He takes 2 clean linen cloths from the shelf, soft and white and slightly frayed at the edges from many washings. He takes a tin of polishing paste, a round flat tin with a lid that presses on and pries off, and he takes a second tin, smaller, containing a finer compound used for the glass. He takes the trimming scissors. He places all of these into a canvas bag that hangs from a hook by the stairwell entrance, and then he begins to climb. The staircase is a spiral, a tight helix of stone steps that winds upward through the body of the tower like the interior of a shell. Each step is a single piece of granite, wedge-shaped, narrow at the center, where it meets the solid stone column that forms the spine of the staircase, and wider at the outer edge where it meets the curving wall. They are worn. Generations of boots have rounded their edges and polished their surfaces to a smoothness that is almost glassy in places, and in the dim light that filters down from above, they gleam faintly, like wet river stones. The keeper places one hand on the outer wall as he climbs, not so much for support as out of habit, and the stone beneath his fingers is cold and slightly damp, with a texture that is both rough and smooth at once. The individual grains of granite palpable beneath the fingertips, but worn down to a continuous surface by the passage of time and the constant moisture in the air. He climbs slowly. There is no reason to hurry. The steps number somewhere in the region of 140, and each one is taken with the same measured pace, the same steady rhythm, one boot and then the other, the sound of each footfall echoing softly in the narrow cylinder of the stairwell. It is a hollow, rounded echo, a sound that seems to travel both upward and downward simultaneously, bouncing off the curved walls and folding back on itself. The air grows slightly warmer as he ascends, or perhaps it is simply that the effort of climbing generates its own warmth, and by the time he reaches the service room, the small chamber just below the lantern room itself, there is a faint dampness on his brow beneath the woolen cap. He pauses here, as he always does, and takes a single breath, and then he climbs the final, narrower set of iron steps, a short, spiral staircase of riveted metal that passes through a hatch in the floor, and he emerges into the lantern room. And here, despite every other morning being precisely the same, there is always a moment of quiet rest. The lantern room is a space unlike any other. It is entirely surrounded by glass, a cage of heavy panes set into an iron framework, and though the glass is streaked with rain, and the world beyond it is nothing but fog and cloud, and the distant grey churning of the sea, the light here is different. It is open. It is the light of the sky itself, pale and diffuse and coming from every direction at once. And after the dim enclosure of the stairwell, it feels expansive, almost weightless. The room is not large. A man can stand in the center and nearly touch the glass on either side. But the view, even on a day such as this, extends in every direction to the full and unbroken circle of the horizon, and there is a sensation of being suspended in the air, held aloft above the sea by nothing more than stone and iron and glass, that never entirely loses its quiet power. At the center of this room stands the lens. The keeper puts away his cloths and tins. He wipes his hands on a rag and flexes his fingers, which have grown stiff from the sustained, careful work. Then he turns his attention to the center of the lens, to the lamp itself. It is a large oil lamp mounted on a pedestal at the exact focal point of the Fresnel lens, and it is fitted with a set of concentric wicks, 4 of them, arranged one inside the other in rings of woven cotton. These wicks draw oil upward from a reservoir below through capillary action, and when lit, they produce a flame of considerable size and brightness, a broad, flat, circular flame that the lens then captures and magnifies and projects outward across the sea. But the wicks must be trimmed. They must be trimmed every day, carefully and evenly, so that the flame burns cleanly and without smoke, because smoke means soot, and soot means a darkened lens, and a darkened lens means a diminished light, and a diminished light means a ship that cannot see its way. The keeper takes up his trimming scissors, the small, precise pair from his bag, and he bends close to the lamp. He trims each wick in turn, cutting away the charred and blackened tip in a single, clean line, leaving the fresh cotton beneath exposed, and even a perfect flat edge across each ring. The charred fragments fall onto a small brass tray placed beneath the lamp for exactly this purpose. Tiny curls of black fibre, weightless and dry. And when all 4 wicks are trimmed to his satisfaction, he brushes the tray clean and sets the scissors aside. The lamp is ready. The wicks are even and white-tipped and waiting for the flame that will come at dusk, and above them the great lens stands polished and clear, a cathedral of glass and brass, silent and shining in the pale grey light. The afternoon passes in the manner that all afternoons pass on this island, which is to say, it does not so much pass as dissolve. There is no clear moment when midday becomes afternoon, no point at which afternoon tips into evening. The sky, which began the day as a pale and featureless grey, simply darkens by imperceptible degrees, the light draining from it slowly, like water soaking into sand, until what remains is a heavy, bruised twilight that sits upon the sea and the island and the tower with a weight that is almost physical. The rain has not stopped. It has changed character, though, shifting from the fine, drifting mist of the morning to something heavier, something with more substance. Drops that strike the lantern room windows with an audible tap, and then slide downward in long, wandering trails. The wind has picked up as well. It comes now in sustained gusts that moan softly around the iron framework of the lantern room, finding the gaps and joints and seams, and speaking through them in a low, continuous voice that rises and falls, but never quite ceases. The keeper has spent the afternoon below, in the service room and the cottage, attending to the dozen small chores that fill the hours between the morning's polishing and the evening's lighting. He has checked the oil reservoir, ensuring that it is filled to the proper level. He has inspected the drainage channels around the base of the tower. He has written a few lines in the station logbook, recording the weather and the wind direction and the state of the sea in the plain, factual language required by the Northern Lighthouse Board. He has eaten a simple meal of bread and cold salted fish and drunk another cup of tea, this one brewed slightly less strong than the morning's, and now, as the last of the grey light surrenders to the encroaching dark, he climbs the tower once more. The stairwell is darker now than it was this morning. The narrow slit windows set into the tower wall at intervals along the spiral admit almost no light at all, and the keeper ascends by feel as much as by sight, his hand trailing along the cold stone wall, his boots finding each worn step with the certainty of long practice. The echo of his footfalls seems louder in the darkness, sharper, each step a distinct percussion that travels up and down the hollow column of the stairwell and returns to him a half-second later, softened and blurred. He carries a small hand lantern, a brass thing with a single candle inside behind a glass shield, and it throws a circle of warm, flickering light onto the steps immediately ahead of him and onto the curved wall beside him, making the granite glitter faintly where the moisture catches the flame. The shadows move and shift as he climbs, swinging with the motion of the lantern in his hand, and the effect is one of gentle, rocking movement, as though the tower itself were swaying, though, of course, it is not. It has not swayed in all the years it has stood here, and it will not sway tonight. He reaches the lantern room and sets his hand lantern on the small iron shelf beside the hatch. The room is cold. The temperature has dropped considerably since this morning, and the glass panes that surround him are now black, or nearly so, reflecting the faint glow of his candle back at him in a dozen overlapping images. Beyond the glass, there is nothing to see. The fog has thickened and merged with the darkness into a single, impenetrable wall, and the sea, though audible, is invisible, its presence known only by sound, a deep and rhythmic booming from the rocks below, and a continuous rushing hiss that rises and falls with each swell. The wind presses against the glass with a low, steady pressure, and the panes rattle softly in their iron frames, a faint and irregular percussion, like fingers drumming absently on a tabletop. The keeper turns his attention to the lamp. It stands where it has always stood, at the precise centre of the Fresnel lens, mounted on its heavy brass pedestal. The pedestal is bolted to the floor of the lantern room, and it houses within it the oil reservoir, a cylindrical tank of considerable capacity filled with refined paraffin oil. The oil has a smell. It is not a strong smell, not from here, not with the reservoir sealed, but it is present nonetheless, a faint, sweet, slightly chemical scent that lingers permanently in the air of the lantern room, a smell that has worked its way into the iron and the brass and even, it seems, into the glass itself. It is the smell of the lighthouse. It is the smell of every evening for years and years, and the keeper registers it not as a new sensation but as a confirmation, a signal that the day's true purpose is about to begin. He opens the small brass valve at the base of the lamp. This is done slowly, carefully, with a deliberate quarter turn of the fingers. The valve is a precision instrument machined to fine tolerances, and it controls the flow of oil from the reservoir up through the narrow fuel tubes and into the base of the wick assembly. As he opens it, there is no visible change, no sound, nothing to indicate that anything has happened at all, but the oil is moving now, drawn upward by the capillary action of the 4 concentric wicks, soaking into the woven cotton fibers and climbing, molecule by molecule, toward the trimmed tips that he prepared this morning. He waits. This is an essential part of the process, this waiting. The wicks must be fully saturated before the flame is applied. If they are lit too soon, if the cotton is still dry in places, the flame will burn unevenly, it will gutter and smoke, and the soot will darken the glass of the lens that he spent 2 hours polishing to perfection. And so he waits. He stands beside the lamp in the cold, dark lantern room, listening to the wind and the rain and the sea, and he waits for the oil to do its slow, invisible work. 5 minutes, perhaps 7. There is no precise measurement for this. The keeper judges it by experience, by some internal sense of timing that has been calibrated over hundreds of identical evenings. When he is satisfied, when he knows without needing to check that the wicks are saturated and ready, he reaches into the pocket of his coat and withdraws a box of matches. The box is small, made of thin cardboard, with a striking surface on one side, and inside the matches are arranged in neat parallel rows, their red phosphorus heads all pointing the same direction. He takes one out. He holds it between his thumb and forefinger for a moment, feeling the thin wooden shaft, the slight roughness of the chemical head, and then he draws it across the striking surface in a single, firm motion. The sound is sharp and immediate in the quiet room, a brief, rasping scratch that ends in a soft pop as the phosphorus ignites. The flame appears at the tip of the match, small and intensely bright, a teardrop of yellow-white fire that dances in the draught and throws the keeper's shadow large and dark against the glass behind him. The smell of sulphur rises, brief and acrid, and then it is gone, replaced by the clean, steady scent of the burning wood. He cups his free hand around the flame to shield it from the draught, and he bends forward, and he touches it to the first wick. The oil catches. It does not catch all at once. It begins as a small blue flame at the point where the match meets the cotton, a tentative, almost invisible flicker that spreads slowly along the trimmed edge of the wick, creeping outward in both directions, growing as it goes. The blue deepens, warms, and then the yellow appears, rising from the blue base like a flower opening, and the first wick is alight, burning with a steady, even flame that gives off a soft, warm glow and the faintest whisper of sound, a continuous, breathy hiss that is the voice of the oil being consumed. He lights the second wick from the first, touching the match to the cotton and watching the same slow bloom repeat itself, and then the third, and then the fourth, each one catching and spreading and joining the others until all four concentric rings are burning together, and the combined flame is a broad, flat, luminous disk of warm golden light that fills the center of the Fresnel lens like a small sun being born. The effect is immediate and extraordinary. The lens, which a moment ago was a dark and dormant shape in the center of the room, comes alive. The light from the flame enters the glass prisms and is captured, bent, redirected, gathered from every angle and focused outward. Each ring of the Fresnel lens takes its portion of the light and refracts it, and the combined effect is a beam of astonishing intensity that leaps from the lens and strikes the glass walls of the lantern room and passes through them into the darkness beyond. The room itself is transformed. The brass fittings glow, the iron framework gleams. The rain on the windows is suddenly visible, each droplet a tiny point of golden fire sliding down the glass. And the keeper's own face, reflected in the panes, is lit warmly from below, the lines and shadows of it softened by the amber light. The cold that has been pressing into the room all day begins very slowly to retreat, pushed back by the radiant warmth of the burning oil, and the air around the lamp shimmers faintly, a barely visible distortion that rises upward through the ventilation chimney above. But the lamp alone is not enough. The light must move. A fixed light, shining steadily from a single point, can be confused with a star or with the light of a distant house on another island. Each lighthouse has its own signature, its own pattern of flashes and intervals, and this pattern is created not by the lamp, but by the rotation of the lens around it. And the lens is rotated by the clockwork. The clockwork mechanism is housed in the base of the pedestal, directly below the lamp, and it is a marvel of Victorian engineering rendered in iron and brass. It operates on the same principle as a grandfather clock, but on a vastly larger scale. A heavy weight, a cylindrical block of cast iron weighing several hundred pounds, is suspended from a cable that is wound around a drum inside the mechanism. As the weight descends, pulled by gravity, it turns the drum, and the drum drives a series of gears, and the gears, through a series of precisely calculated reductions, turn the platform on which the lens sits, rotating it at a slow, fixed, unvarying speed. The mechanism must be wound by hand. There is a winding handle, a heavy iron crank that protrudes from the side of the pedestal, and the keeper takes hold of it now. He turns it. The effort is considerable. Each turn of the handle lifts the great iron weight a few inches, drawing the cable back onto the drum, and the resistance is substantial, a deep, grinding pull that the keeper feels in his arms and shoulders and across his back. He turns it steadily, one revolution after another, counting silently, feeling the cable tighten and the weight rise, until the mechanism is fully wound and the handle will turn no further. He releases the brake. This is a simple lever, a brass handle mounted on the side of the pedestal, and when he pulls it, the clockwork engages. There is a pause, the briefest of hesitations, as the gears mesh and the weight begins to exert its force, and then the first sound comes. A tick, deep, resonant, metallic, felt as much as heard, and then a second, and then a third, tick, 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 slow and measured, and absolutely even, each one identical to the last, each one separated from the next by exactly the same interval. The gears hum beneath the ticking, a low, continuous drone that is more vibration than sound, felt through the soles of the boots, and through the pedestal and through the floor. And the lens, almost imperceptibly at first, begins to turn. It moves so slowly that the eye cannot detect the motion directly. It is only by watching the beam of light where it strikes the far window that the rotation becomes apparent. A gradual, majestic sweep of golden radiance that slides across the glass and passes through it and swings out into the wild darkness beyond, and then continues, circling, circling, an endless, patient arc of light turning above the storm-black sea. The keeper stands and watches. He watches the light sweep past the windows, one pane, and then the next, and then the next, and he listens to the deep, steady ticking of the clockwork, and the hum of the gears, and the whisper of the flame, and the low, ceaseless voice of the wind outside. The lighthouse is alive. Every part of it is working, every mechanism engaged, every surface doing what it was designed to do. The flame burns, the oil flows, the wicks draw, the lens gathers and the lens projects. The clockwork turns, the weight descends, slowly, invisibly, surrendering its potential energy to the gears one tick at a time, and the great beam of light sweeps around and around and around in its long, slow, endless circle, reaching out across miles of dark water to meet whatever eyes might be searching for it. The rhythm is set. The night has begun. Part 4, The Night Watch. The chair is old. It has been in this lantern room for longer than the keeper himself, longer perhaps than any living person can account for, and it bears the evidence of its years in every crease and scuff and worn patch of its surface. It is a heavy thing, broad and deep-seated, with a high back and wide arms, and it is upholstered in leather that was once, presumably, a rich and uniform brown, but has since darkened and softened and developed a patina of use that varies from place to place, lighter on the arms where hands have rested, darker on the seat where the weight of countless keepers has compressed and polished the hide to a smooth, almost glassy finish. The leather is cracked in places, fine lines that spread across the surface like the tributaries of a river delta, and in one or two spots the cracks have deepened enough to reveal the pale, dry material beneath. But the chair is sound. It is deeply, fundamentally comfortable, in the way that only very old and very well-used furniture can be, having long since surrendered any pretense of firmness and settled into a shape that receives the human body as though it were expecting it. The keeper lowers himself into it now. He does so slowly, the way a man does at the end of a long day, when his legs have carried him up and down 140 stone steps more than once, and the chair accepts him with a soft, leathery exhalation, a faint creak of the wooden frame beneath the upholstery, and then silence. He settles. His back presses into the high back of the chair. His arms come to rest on the broad armrests, and his hands lie open, palms down, fingers loosely curled. His boots are planted flat on the floor, and through them he can feel very faintly the vibration of the clockwork mechanism beneath, the deep and steady pulse of the gears turning, transmitted through the pedestal and through the iron floor plates and up through the soles of his feet and into his bones. It is a subtle sensation, barely perceptible, but once noticed, it becomes a constant companion, a low, continuous thrum that underlies everything, like the heartbeat of the tower itself. The ticking fills the room. It has been present since the moment he released the brake, of course, but now, sitting still, with no other task to occupy the hands or the mind, the ticking becomes the dominant sound, the axis around which all other sounds arrange themselves. Tick, a pause, tick, a pause, tick. Each one is identical. Each one is a small, precise, metallic percussion produced by the escapement mechanism deep within the clockwork as it releases the energy of the descending weight, one measured increment at a time. It is not a sharp sound. It has a roundness to it, a depth, as though the tick were not merely a surface noise, but something that resonates within the iron body of the mechanism itself, a vibration that begins in the gears and spreads outward through the brass housing and into the air of the room. Between each tick there is a silence, but the silence is not empty. It is filled with the hum of the gears, that low, continuous drone that sits just beneath the threshold of conscious hearing, and it is filled with the whisper of the flame, the soft and breathy sound of the 4 concentric wicks burning steadily within their glass chimney, consuming the oil that rises endlessly from the reservoir below. And beyond these sounds, beyond the clockwork and the flame, there is the storm. It has worsened, as the keeper knew it would. The wind has shifted to the northwest and strengthened, and it strikes the tower now with a force that is audible even through the thick stone walls, a deep, sustained moan that rises in pitch as the gusts intensify and then drops again as they pass. An endless cycle of crescendo and release that has no pattern and no predictability, but which, over time, over the course of minutes and then hours, begins to feel less like chaos and more like a kind of music, a slow and formless composition played on the instrument of the tower itself. The rain has thickened into something closer to a downpour, and it batters the lantern room windows with a sound that is both violent and, from within the safety of this room, profoundly soothing. It strikes the glass in waves, each gust carrying a fresh curtain of water that hits the panes with a sound like thrown gravel, a sharp, hissing rush, and then the gust passes and the rain eases for a moment, tapping more gently. Individual drops audible now, each one a tiny, distinct impact on the thick glass, before the next gust arrives and the hissing rush begins again. The glass holds. It has always held. These panes are thick and heavy, set deep into their iron frames, sealed with putty and cork and the accumulated grime of decades, and the storm, for all its fury, cannot touch what is inside. The keeper is aware of this in the way that a man is aware of the ground beneath his feet, not as a conscious thought, but as a foundational certainty, a knowledge so deep and so often confirmed that it requires no examination. The walls are 3 feet thick at the base. The stone was quarried and cut and fitted by men who understood the sea and who built accordingly, and the tower has stood through storms far worse than this one, and will stand through storms far worse than any that will come in the keeper's lifetime. Inside this room, inside this circle of glass and iron and stone, there is safety, there is warmth. The lamp burns and the gears turn, and the rain cannot enter, and the wind cannot enter, and the cold can press its face against the windows, but it cannot come through. The keeper is enclosed, contained, held within the steady heartbeat of the mechanism and the amber glow of the flame, and the storm outside is not a threat, but a lullaby. The keeper hears them. He hears the creak of the hatch cover being lifted, and the soft scrape of a boot on the iron step, and the quiet, familiar presence of another human being entering the room. He does not open his eyes. He does not need to. The clockwork ticks. The light turns. The rain falls against the glass in its endless, gentle percussion. The warmth of the lamp presses against his face, and the leather of the chair holds him, and the tower holds the chair, and the rock holds the tower, and the sea holds the rock, and everything is exactly as it should be, steady and turning, and warm and safe. The keeper closes his eyes fully, and the sounds blur together, the ticking and the rain and the hum of the gears, and the whisper of the flame and the moan of the wind, all of it merging into a single, continuous, undifferentiated sound that is no longer any one thing, but is simply the sound of the night itself carrying him down gently, gently into the deep and dreamless dark.